Okay, we're looking now at lesson number 15, and the topic of this lecture, number 15, is going to be an overview of Auschwitz, what happened at Auschwitz, and how Auschwitz was liberated. January 27th is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and we know that as Holocaust, National Holocaust Remembrance Day, and many countries, including the United States, recognize that day as such. What was Auschwitz? Well, when we say the word Auschwitz, it usually brings up thoughts of terror and death. Rightly so. Auschwitz was located at the central intersection of the roads and railways of Europe. Before the Second World War, the Jews of Auschwitz, the town where the camp was built, they were often artisans or merchants, and they constituted approximately half the population of the town. Auschwitz became the symbol of the Holocaust due to its geographical size, but in addition to that, because the Jews were sent there from all over Europe to undergo selection for systematic murder in their gas chambers. In addition, we have detailed testimonies of Holocaust survivors who survived the camp. We say and we write Auschwitz, but we actually mean a torture center, a terror that we cannot possibly conceive, and yet we're forced to. The essence of evil and horror. Yet Auschwitz was not another planet, but a huge complex built by human beings like you and I to murder other human beings like you and I in the cruelest industrialized manner known to man. Auschwitz was surrounded by a double layer of electrified barbed wire fences, guarded by SS guards armed with machine guns and rifles and dogs. In March of 1942, trains began to roll into Auschwitz carrying Jews daily. Several trains a day arrived. 1,000 or more passengers would be brought in from the ghettos of Europe each and every day. It's imperative that we remember that man's inhumanity to man during the Holocaust did not originate in Auschwitz. There's a long, twisted road to Auschwitz. But rather, it began with racism, terror, anti-democratic legislation, and propaganda. So what happened at this death camp, this infamous death camp? Well, first of all, we know between 1.3 and 1.5 million people were murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. More than 90% of those were Jews. The other 10% were Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, Roma, Sinti, Gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and other political dissidents. The vast majority of the victims, who came from both Western and Eastern Europe, were unaware of their destination and their fate when they arrived there. They were transported like animals in cattle cars, arriving in a state of total physical collapse. Most of the people actually never really entered the camp, but were selected immediately and just crossed over the camp on their way to immediate extermination in the gas chambers. So our aim, as we study this, is to restore the names and the faces of the human beings that perished in Auschwitz, thereby thwarting the Nazi plan to erase them and any traces in memory of them. In her post-war testimony, Olga Albolin, a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz, relates to her family's arrival in Auschwitz the following way. She says, "We didn't even say goodbye to Mother and the little ones. We just had some food yet from home, and I gave it to my mother and said, 'We'll see you tonight.' And that was it. I never saw them again. It was such a commotion there in Auschwitz. So many people. And when they emptied the wagons, thousands and thousands and trains kept coming from all over Europe. Not just Hungary. It was just Hungary. It was just unbelievable. Entire families arrived at Auschwitz. But soon after their arrival, They were brutally broken apart. They were thrown out of the cattle cars, put into separate lines, separated by men, women, and children. SS medical personnel, including the famous Angel of Death, Dr. Joseph Mengele, conducted selections, picking people for human experiments. But most were sent directly to the gas chambers, where they were killed and then put into the crematoriums and burned on the same day. Mengele and his colleagues did, however, perform medical experiments in the name of science on the victims. The dehumanized minority often became registered prisoners with shaved heads in striped uniforms. Jews that were chosen for slave labor, in other words. They were stripped of everything, including their outward identification between male and female. Their personal identities were taken away. Their hair was shaven. Their registration number was tattooed on their arm. In the morning, 60% of the 6 people in a typical bunk did not wake up. The other 40% went over the pockets of the dead people to find a piece of bread. The hygienic conditions were very, very, very poor in that period. One survivor says, "I remember that I searched a dead body in the bunk and I found a piece of bread. That piece of bread was crawling with lice, and you shook off the bread and put it in your mouth and ate it. We all were crawling with lice. Taking a shower was not an option." You see, the Nazis terrorized and dehumanized the prisoners in Auschwitz. They took them on death marches when they realized that they were going to be caught by the Allies. They were taken out on death marches through the most extreme weather in raggedy, thin clothing, many falling and staggering by the side of the road and being killed as soon as they were falling out of marching in the line. How was Auschwitz liberated? By January of 1945, almost 5 years after the camp had started operation, Soviet troops were advancing towards Auschwitz. The Nazis were desperate, of course, to withdraw and sent most of their remaining prisoners on these death marches, westward in the height of a Polish winter. Many prisoners, of course, died during these marches. Soviet soldiers liberated Auschwitz on January the 27th, finding approximately 7,650 barely living prisoners throughout the entire complex. So, in summary, we can take a look and say, okay, well, it was a major death camp, and it was. We can look on the map and see it was 37 miles west of Krakow. We can look at the structure of the camp and how it was run by looking at 1940, and SS Chief Heinrich Himmler orders the establishment of the camp, and political prisoners are first brought there. But in 1941, Himmler orders a second, much larger camp to be built, which becomes Birkenau, Auschwitz II, the death camp. And conditions become degrading and inhuman. Gas chambers are built, crematoriums are built, all for the sole purpose of murder. A third section of Auschwitz III, near Monowitz, which is called Buda Monowitz, is then built. It incorporated 45 sub-labor camps. The name Buda was based on the Buda synthetic rubber factory on the site, owned by the IG Farben company, the largest chemical company in Germany, which was also making the Zyklon B for the gas chambers. Auschwitz was first run by Commandant Rudolf Höss and was guarded by the cruel regiment of the SS Death Heads units. It was surrounded by electrically charged fences, and guards were posted throughout. Located 2/3 of a mile beyond the fences, there were even guards. By August of 1944, there were 105,168 prisoners in Auschwitz, whilst another 50,000 prisoners lived in Auschwitz's satellite camps. The Jews were thrown out of the trains, sent to the gas chambers, as I said, in most cases immediately. The gas chambers constituted the largest and most efficient extermination method employed by the Nazis. 4 chambers were built, each with the potential to kill 6,000 people a day. Shower rooms were built to confuse the victims, to make them think they were taking a shower before being sent to work so they would be disinfected, and instead they were quickly gassed. Prisoners were put in through medical tests, especially if they were dwarfs or twins, torturous medical tests on them in extreme cold, extreme heat. Sterilization was performed. And the Sonderkommandos were the Jews that were chosen to drag the bodies of their fellow Jews out of the gas chambers and to put them into the ovens. So the day that Auschwitz was liberated, the Soviet army on January 27th found only 7,650 barely living, barely called human beings walking around the camp.